Hi, I hope you're having a lovely day. Sorry if my voice sounds a little weird, I'm kind of recovering from being sick. Today, I'm very excited to be talking about how an idea from when I was 15 turned into publishing a comic on a few different webcomic sites, something that I am overjoyed to finally get to tell the full story of. This is less of a redesign video and more of a how we got here sort of format. To cover the full process of how I got here, I had to dredge up some very old, cringeworthy pieces of art that I will be trying very hard not to hate on, since I do believe that old art is literally what brings artists to where they are right now. I'll be finishing up with a full lineup of the characters to compare them to their original designs, as well as showing some comic pages. First, I wanted to talk about the decision to start drawing my comic. I think that's often something that people wonder about. What's the point when you can go from concept to creation? I think it depends on who you are, but in my case, I had this story completely written, all my main character designs, and generally everything very planned out. I'd been editing it and nitpicking the story for ages, but I was essentially trying to wait on drawing it because, oh well, I'm not good enough yet, but when I am, I'll start drawing. And then I came to the realization that when I'm 20-something chapters in, I probably wouldn't like the art at the beginning anyway, even if I had deemed it good enough at the time. Artists tend to be our own worst critics, and I'd probably be eternally wrapped in, I've improved, but when it's better, I can start drawing. In my opinion, it's better to start something and have stuff you might want to redraw later than to never start at all. Which is a very roundabout way to say that I had a lot of information for this comic before I published the first episode. Belladonna Belladonna started as a traditional prose novel that I decided to make into a comic instead. I realized a large portion of the story would work better with visuals, especially with Jaime's deal in general, and I loved drawing the characters a lot. I did also completely put the novel into script format, because making a script into a comic works better in my brain than making a novel into a comic without the middleman of the script. So I wrote the entire novel, and then I turned it into a script, and then I started drawing it. Don't be like me. That was not the way to do that. The fact that the story started as a novel does mean that it is so much longer than I would have made it if I thought of it as a comic initially. It does have an episodic angle, which I think accounts for most of the length, but the overarching plot I'm really excited about is very kind of gradual, which I always feel the need to warn people about. This isn't really a spoiler, but the first dilemma for the cast is Jaime trying to get home and the mysterious circumstances with which he appeared in the magical world. But believe me, there's going to be so much more to unearth and so much more drama in general. There are 3 arcs, which in my head are 3 books, and each of those arcs are an average of 20-something chapters, of which usually have an average of 40 comic pages. But enough with the long-winded explanation about starting the comic in its current form. I promised you the process of how I got here, all the cringe-worthy old art, and so you shall have it. Surprisingly, the first piece of Belladonna Belladonna art came after the first pieces of my superhero comic. The superhero story with these characters is a tangent that I won't talk too much about here, but it's one that I really thought was developed after Belladonna before looking up the receipts. But anyway, the first drawing I ever did for Belladonna was actually when I was homesick in 2021. I was mindlessly scrolling through Pinterest and I spotted a cute little drawing of a cat with a witch hat. If I can find it, it'll appear on screen with art credits. And I thought to myself, in my feverish state, aw, that's so cute. I wonder what kind of witch would make a hat for her cat. And then I drew this. Gotta start somewhere, I guess. But this was my very first concept for the main character, Belladonna Fox. I'm pretty sure her name came to me pretty instantly too. Sometimes I spend hours upon hours looking up names and meanings for my characters, but for her, I was just kind of like, oh yeah, she's a belladonna, which is a poisonous plant, not a name, but you know, we don't care. I then, of course, wanted to give her a friend, and I drew the early concepts of Jaime. I wasn't entirely sure where I was going with him. Hilariously, neither of the designs changed drastically over the course of the process, even though the story did. Belladonna always had round glasses and curly hair with a white rogue-like streak in it. Jaime always had the same jacket and freckles. I do remember that apparently in early concepts, Jaime needed to be disguised and hide his ears or something when he was in the magical world. Their early dynamic was pretty boring. It was standard, grumpy, and sunshine, with literally no personality beneath that. There's still aspects of that dynamic in the current version, especially when they're getting to know each other in the first few chapters, but suffice to say, their someone will die, a fun dynamic switch to this. I am kidding, they do have a more complex dynamic than that, but it's goofy. In the early stages of the comic, this was actually a love story between Jaime and Belladonna, which I've since dropped completely. The idea of these two specifically getting together at this point is kind of icky to me now. Like, no. The more I wrote these two and figured out who they were, I thought they read much better as a dynamic duo, platonic soulmates, comes in a pair, do not separate dynamic, especially towards the middle of the first arc. Not saying there will be no romance in this comic, but it will not be between these two, because no, it's so icky to me now. When I was a younger writer, I just kind of threw OCs at each other to see if they would be a cute ship, and I do not like these two as a ship anymore. They are a set, do not separate, they do not kiss. Anyway, as I kept going through these drawings, Belladonna started developing more of a personality. She was a bit of a diva, a bit of a goofball, and very into fashion apparently. She was basically my little dress-up doll. A few of these sketches are definitely a result of my beginner artist self using actual illustrations on Pinterest as references, which I currently think is a bit not ideal. While I definitely support using references in art, I don't think using other people's art as reference is always a good idea, because then that gets into copying/tracing territory. I'd say using reference images of real people or 3D models is usually okay, but what I was doing, I guess it's fine for practice, but not if you want to post it anywhere, since then you get into aforementioned copying/tracing territory. I've gone off on a tangent. Let's get back on track. Soon enough, two other characters started showing up in this world that I was beginning to figure out, Briar and Arius. I also picked their names pretty much immediately, but other than that, I didn't have much about them other than they were there, and I wanted Belladonna to have more friends. Also, weirdly, I think Briar's prosthetic leg used to switch legs occasionally. PSA to all other artists who are also thinking of doing a comic: draw a reference sheet for your characters. It doesn't have to be a complete turnaround. It can literally just be one image of them so you can remember, because even if you think you will remember, you will switch up silly things like this, and then you will feel dumb. This is advice I am telling myself. I actually started writing the story properly sometime in early 2022, but as I mentioned earlier, originally it wasn't going to be a comic. I wrote it in a prose style, like it was going to be a novel, and just kept drawing my characters on the side. I finished the first draft in June and kept working at edits and drafts for the remainder of the year. I had compiled a collection of all the drawings I made before I started to draw the comic itself, not counting the metric ton of random sketches, doodles in my homework, and other miscellaneous things that I didn't happen to photograph and are probably in my house somewhere. And it ended up being roughly 250 drawings that I had photographed. Depending on how you write your comics, you might not need to have as much already written as I do. But based on my previous experience, I knew that I work best when I have a finished script completely edited before I start drawing physical pages. That way I can foreshadow stuff, I can make sure things are consistent, and I won't lose motivation if I write myself into a corner. I have it all already written. And let's talk about those pages. I started drawing the first page for Belladonna back in April of 2024, and I decided that I wanted to make it a page format comic rather than a scroll format one. My previous attempts at a comic had a myriad of issues, but one of those issues was the fact that I actually don't like drawing scroll formatted comics. I just thought that webtoons had to be scroll format, so I just did that. There are plenty of lovely comics that are scroll format, but the medium isn't my favorite to work in. In fact, the first pages I did for Lost and Forgotten, when I was doing them traditionally before I switched to making them scroll format, was in page format, and then I just thought I had to switch it to scroll format because I was making them digitally. My style has changed a bit over the course of making the pages, and I definitely think I've improved on certain things, specifically in paneling and the fact that in some of the earlier pages in chapter 1 and 2, there are a few instances where I think I put too much text in one page or panel. As I've been working on chapter 3, I've definitely improved in that regard. I also finally found a line art brush that I actually like, so the style shifted due to that as well. The plot basically changed over time from goofy rom-com with witches to episodic, kind of epic, about friendship with witches. Also, when I realized I was genderqueer, I went all in on the genderqueer storyline, which I am so excited to talk about in future chapters, as well as quite a few neurodivergent themes and a few very strong feelings about the medical industry, specifically about chronic conditions. It's not the main focus of the comic or anything, but it's insanely frustrating that people have to pay for regular life-saving care, especially in the US, as well as some strong feelings about the government of the story and how fascism takes hold in a society. That one's more central to the overarching story over the 3 arcs. But the main focus of the comic is love and friendship and finding your people, because I am nothing if not a huge sap. Anyway, here's a plot summary for the current comic. Things have a tendency to go wrong around Belladonna Fox. Some think she's jinxed by magical premonition. Some believe she's unlucky. And others have a feeling she's just too impulsive for her own good. Belladonna has a chance encounter with a strange interdimensional creature, a human, Jaime, who can't remember how they arrived in this magical world. With the help of her friend Arius, an alchemist with a Midas curse, and frenemy Briar, a druid whose ability to communicate with plants does not tend to extend to her fellow fairies, Belladonna works to find Jaime a way home, unaware of what dark secrets she's stirring up. One thing I did want to touch on that's in the current comic is the paneling and page format, which I kind of mentioned before. I've got a little slideshow happening over here, but basically I've been working on my effective communication in the paneling. I'm currently studying 2D animation in college, and storyboarding is pretty applicable to paneling actually. I've started to experiment a bit with my pages as well, and I've been having a great time and can't wait to improve further as I keep making comics. I recently finally figured out how to keep font size consistent in Procreate, so nothing can stop me now. My process for making pages goes something like this. First, obviously, I have the script, and then I thumbnail an entire chapter using the script, which usually gives me an estimate for how many pages it'll be and how long it'll take to draw. After that, I'll go in and add all my panels and make sure my guttering looks okay. Some art programs have things that do this automatically for you, I think, in some way. But my primary program is Procreate, so I just tend to draw them all myself while in drawing assist mode to keep the lines straight. Before I start sketching though, I put all my word balloons and text in. I know some people like to do this step last, but since it's so tedious, I prefer to start with it and get it out of the way. Plus, if I do the word balloons after the thumbnails, I can ensure that they won't feel cramped when they're alongside my finished art, and they'll both have room to breathe. After that, I move on to sketching, usually with a differently colored brush. After sketching, I do line art, and then colors, and then shading, like I would with any traditional illustration. Not counting chapter title pages, I've published 82 pages of the comic so far, which is both very exciting and so crazy to me, as I have honestly only scratched the surface of this story. There are 25 chapters in the first book, and there'll be many, many more pages to come. On to the character lineup. Belladonna is obviously one of the main 2 characters. She's a witch with a heart of gold who tends to skew towards bad decision-making in most of what she does. She is my favorite girl. She's got a loud and bright sort of personality. Her priority has always been doing what she thinks is right, no matter the personal consequences. I think she's like a little paragon in that sense, because she just will barrel ahead and do things. My favorite part about her character is how genuine she is. She feels things very intensely and acts upon those feelings pretty quickly, something that can be a positive trait but also does get her into trouble. She's dealt with a lot of bullying due to her jinx and leans into it at times in a, well, you already think I'm weird, I might as well be myself sort of way, especially how she acts and dresses sometimes. She wants people to think she doesn't care what they think, but she most certainly does, especially based on the first few chapters. She doesn't tend to be super self-aware about her own motivations at times, since she's a person who shouldn't be expected to constantly be self-aware about everything they do. And on a related note, one of my pet peeves in media in general is when characters seem to talk like they are getting a good grade in therapy and always communicate their feelings and motivations so well, like, that is not how people act. It is okay for characters to be able to communicate their feelings. In fact, some really, really good scenes are when they communicate their feelings. I'm not saying they shouldn't communicate their feelings, but what I'm saying is that characters should act like people, and people can't always communicate with 100% efficiency. And I'm not suggesting that making your characters act stupid on purpose to cause misunderstandings and provide conflict is a good idea. That sort of thing is usually just bad writing. But a good in-character misunderstanding is great. Like, take Romeo and Juliet. Dramatic irony slaps if you do it right, and it's in character for your characters. Don't make your characters act out of character, but sometimes people don't communicate well. And that means we get that juicy, dramatic irony. Okay. Tangent over. I got a little heated on that, apparently. Jaime, in comparison, is sort of her foil. Much more quiet, subdued, and most notably, does kind of understand his own personal motivations to an unhealthy degree. He's definitely confrontational and grumpy and all that in the first 2 chapters, since he's really confused about where he is and what's going on and how he's going to get home and whether or not Belladonna is potentially a crazy person and not actually a witch. But I had him talk to her about that grumpiness and confrontationness, that's not a word, later, because Jaime as a character is much too self-aware to be persnickety and not acknowledge it. I want to say more about Jaime as a character, but again, trying so hard to keep mysteries, so I will not say it. I will in future videos if that's something people are interested in, because I like him a lot. He's my blorbo. Anyway, Briar was always Belladonna's frenemy with varying degrees of enemy. In one version, she was an absolute jerk to the degree that her redemption was not believable at all. I won't be spoiling too much about her and Belladonna's deal, since that's about to come up in chapter 5. But I do like her and Belladonna's newer dynamic. She's a druid with the ability to speak to plants, and has a myriad of personal issues. She's still edgy, as the original concept. She looks the same, actually, I'm not gonna lie. As for Arius, he is also my favorite guy. He's introduced as Belladonna's best friend and generally the voice of reason in the first chapter, but will have a lot more screen time later on that I'm going to try not to spoil too much of. I really like his power set, the Midas Curse, which is going to be introduced in chapter 4. It basically means he has the ability to turn things into other things by touching them, and has an Elsa complex about it, which is why he has to wear enchanted clothes and gloves. I imagine him as someone who would probably be a fashion icon if not for the fact that he has to buy enchanted clothes that tends to be boring or don't have enough variety since they need to be enchanted for reasons that are also kind of pseudo-spoilery, so we're not going to get into that. Here's a lineup of my original concepts for my characters, and here's the updated current versions that are in the comic right now. A lot of this video has been me trying not to give too much information away, my bad, but I hope it was still fun to see some of the process of how I conceptualize my comic. I update episodes every Thursday with month-long hiatuses between chapters to keep my buffer up since I'm still a full-time student. Chapters usually have an average of 6 episode updates, which are the ones that update weekly. However, if people prefer, I might shift to a fully weekly on Thursdays update schedule with no in-between chapter hiatuses, but those updates wouldn't be as long, maybe only like a page or 2 per update. Anyway, closing thoughts, as per usual, drink water, be nice to yourself, and keep drawing. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you have a lovely day.